Students and parents in Campbellsport are trying to come to grips with a very painful and sudden loss. A speeding SUV carrying 9 high school girls crashed last week, hit 3 teenagers and injuring 6 others. A sleepover, a girls' night out of innocent fun, ended with a horrific accident on a dark country road. How does a close-knit community deal with such grief and begin to heal? Our guest this morning is the bereavement coordinator with the Grief Resource Center at Horizon Home Care and Hospice, Kayla Waldschmidt. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This tragedy hits especially close to home for you, doesn't it, Kayla?
It does. I grew up in Campbellsport and graduated from Campbellsport High School. So even though I don't know the girls directly, I can recognize their names and know where their families, generations of their families are.
Yeah, it is a close-knit community. How can you describe what this community, not only the school, but the greater community going through right now?
Well, I think just like me, everybody knows generations of these families, and many of them know these girls. It's a very tight-knit community. There's only 500 students at that school and several thousand in the town. So for this to happen there, it really vibrates on everybody is impacted.
And the suddenness of it all, the age of the victims, certainly just compounds the sense of loss and grief, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You never expect to lose a child or have a young person die in the community. So it's always a shock when something like this happens. And we can never prepare for a tragedy like this. So we don't get to say goodbye. We don't get to finish any unfinished business that we have with them. So it comes out of left field, and we have a lot of things that are unsaid and undone.
You cannot prepare, but you certainly can respond, and that
Absolutely.
is taking place up there in Campbellsport and throughout the Fond du Lac County area. What kinds of things are underway to meet the needs of first of all, young people?
Well, it sounds like right away they had counselors at the school to be able to assist with any students who needed to talk, who needed to start processing their. I think it's beautiful that they're having the visitation with all 3 girls together at the high school, so that as a community we can honor all 3 losses together. I think that will help the community be able to process all 3 and come together and really support each other through the magnitude of this loss. And it's been beautiful to see one of the brothers come and step forward and start a scholarship fund so that there's a lasting remembrance. And I'm sure as we move forward there'll be many more remembrances and memorials in honor of these girls.
So there are things being done on a school basis, but obviously young people need help at home as well.
Right.
Life is such an emotional roller coaster for all of us, especially for young people, teenagers, and when this comes along, it just compounds it. What are some of the red flags that parents need to be watching out for at this time?
Teenagers especially will show you they're grieving through their actions much more than their words. So you'll want to watch out for any red flags like drinking, drug use, being overly promiscuous. You also want to watch out for behavior changes in your children. You know, for a child who is very outgoing to suddenly become isolated, not want to participate in things that they normally enjoyed would be a big red flag. And it can definitely swing the other way too for a child who is more reserved, who becomes suddenly overly social. We really are concerned about that because they're running and avoiding their feelings. I always like to tell teenagers that feelings are feelings, but behavior is a choice. So we need, as parents, to model for them, what do I do with these feelings? You know, how do I express my sadness? How do I express anger if I have that in ways that are healthy so that I don't get in trouble, that I don't hurt somebody else, and that I don't do property damage. And so really it's helping them find the tools to cope. Yeah,
that's so important. You're talking about feelings and expressing those feelings, but also you can control your behavior at the same time. Yeah. Not only are young people hurting, but how do you help? How do you find support for the school counselors, the teachers who are close to these young people, and of course the parents who certainly are affected by all of this as well?
There's a big myth in our culture that adults have to be strong for kids, and it's not true. We need to model for them what grief should look like and how we cope with it. So number 1 is just to acknowledge that it is impacting you and that you're struggling with it, and to talk with others who are going through that, and then seeking out support groups, counselors, In the community, they can reach out to churches, hospitals, mental health clinics that may be offering grief support groups to get that support for them.
Horizon Grief Resource Center, you're the bereavement coordinator there. The state's only walk-in clinic, isn't it?
It is. And we are the only walk-in clinic that has free services for grief, and so we can be a support to people as well, or help connect them to a resource within their own community if we're too far to travel to.
Right, exactly. Whether it's, you know, a family matter, or whether it's part of a larger school tragedy like this as well.
Absolutely.
And last year, I believe you saw more clients than you ever have in the history of your resource center.
We did. We've been open for a little over 5 years, and we keep growing each year. And so last year we saw a record number of 3,700 people over the course of the year, with counseling and support groups and workshops.
Very good, Kayla Waldschmidt. We're talking about coping with grief. This is in light of the tragedy that happened in Campbellsport involving the girls who died and those who were injured in that car accident. We'll continue more with our conversation with Kayla Waldschmidt when Eye to Eye returns in just a moment. Welcome back. We're talking about coping with grief following the tragic accident involving 9 Campbellsport High School students. Our guest is Kayla Waldschmidt with the Grief Resource Center for Horizon Home and Hospice. When you hear of grief, we've heard many times the stages of dealing with grief. There's one model, the Kubler-Ross stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And yet everyone deals with grief differently.
You know, I think sometimes we expect grief to be very nice, neat, and tidy, and it's very messy. So we don't go through all the stages and we're done. We really come back and cycle through all of the different feelings, and some of it might not apply for each of us. So we're all unique in what we experience. The one thing that we need to remember is that grief doesn't wrap up in 3 days or even a week. And so this process of grief is going to last years for people. Not to the intensity that we're feeling right now, but we will continue to process those feelings over a long period of time.
And everyone goes through these stages differently at different times. And there's some other, you mentioned a Cox model of grief as well.
Right. I love the Sharon Cox model of grief, because at the beginning we feel this immense shock, disbelief that this has happened, and we're just trying to understand it. But 3 to 6 months after a person passes away is when the really hard part of grief comes in, and we start to feel that immense sadness and anger. It might bring up some guilt for people, and it feels like we're on a really rough roller coaster that's going incredibly fast. And as we let those feelings out and process it and really take good care of ourselves, it starts to slow down, and we move into a continued grief stage, and eventually we end up at new beginning acceptance of what is my life going to look like now, while also continuing a bond with that person who passed away.
And all the time, it's always important to continue expressing yourself, communicating with those who are close to you and with whom you trust.
Absolutely. The more, it sounds counterintuitive, we want to run from those hard feelings, we want to ignore them or push them down, but the more that we express them and let them out, the intensity will reduce, and we'll start to see ourselves having some good moments, some good days.
Young people obviously feel they're indestructible, and tragically, this is certainly, you hate to say, okay, a lesson, but there's certainly things to be learned from anything, whether it's something that's positive that happens or negative. And immediately following this, I would imagine young people are looking at this and saying, boy, we really need to be careful in what we're doing and how we are carrying out our lives.
After a tragedy like this, our veil of safety drops. Where normally we walk around, even as adults, we walk around and we think, I'm going to be safe today, my family's going to be safe, everybody's going to make it home tonight, and nothing bad is going to happen to us. But when a tragedy like this happens, that safety veil drops, and we realize how fragile the world is and how vulnerable we all actually are. So in the short term, yes, we all are driving a little more carefully. But unfortunately, over a couple months, that veil of safety comes back up for each of us. And we might all, go back to some behavior that's a little more risky. And we start to feel like everything is going to be okay again. for these girls that were in that car, that this might be a lasting impact for them, and they might change their behavior permanently. But unfortunately for everybody else, will most likely go back.
And they, among everyone, really are going to need the support over the weeks and months and years ahead.
Yeah, this is an incredibly big event, and so they're going to need ongoing support for years.
The Horizon Grief Resource Center, as we talked about earlier, provides free counseling to those in need, and yet it takes money. I know you have a big fundraiser coming up later on this month. Tell us about that, Kayla.
On February 18th, we'll have our 6th annual Matters of the Heart Gala, and this gala funds our resource center, keeps our center open 6 days a week, and also keeps all of our counseling, support groups, and workshops free of charge to anyone in the community in the state of Wisconsin who has experienced grief and loss.
Very good. Kayla, thanks so much for stopping by and sharing your insight on this matter.